Welcome to Camp Constitution Radio with your host, Hal Shurtleff. This show is heard on WBCQ The Planet every Monday night at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and it is replayed on Thursday nights at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And you can also hear this show on Podomatic.com. Just go to Camp Constitution, and you'll find the program there, usually within a reasonable time, maybe several days to a week. You'll find this show as well as many other shows that we have, and some classic interviews of folks like Gary Allen and Alan Stang and many others. Also on our YouTube channel, which you can get our YouTube channel, Camp Constitution, and we encourage you to subscribe. This show is brought to you by Camp Constitution, which, among other things, runs a family camp, a week-long family camp. And our next camp is coming right up. It's going to be from August 5th to the 11th at the Lakeside Christian Camp and Conference Center in beautiful Pittsfield, Massachusetts. And we have a great lineup of instructors this year, as we do every year, including Lord Christopher Monckton and Chris Ann Hall and Dr. Duke Pesta and Professor Willie Soon. So we're looking forward to it. And we also have a weekend camp in central Maine, coastal Maine, where this show was broadcast. Actually, the show is broadcast out of Monticello, Maine on WBCQ The Planet. And I have a guest on today. Barbara, are you there? No, I know she's not called in yet.
I
Barbara?
have called in.
Hello,
Oh,
there you are.
yes?
Okay. I'm having a little trouble with the computer. I couldn't see that you're calling, but I think we're recording anyway. I hope we are. But
okay.
Barbara from Harlem, thank you for coming on the show. And
thank you for having me.
Yeah, let me give you a little introduction before we start our interview. I have known about you for a while. You're sort of a regular guest at Tea Party rallies, radio shows, YouTube, Facebook, and just last week we had a table at the 5th annual Flag Day Second Amendment rally in Belchertown, Massachusetts, and that's where I met you. And I heard you give a relatively short speech, and I said, "Boy, this is one special lady." And I gave a little interview at your table, which is on our YouTube channel. And I got a copy of your very interesting book, "Escaping the Racism of Low Expectations." So tell us a little bit about yourself and what brought you to where you are today.
Well, I was born in Harlem, and I'm a black woman. And, of course, in my community, black equals becoming a Democrat. So at the time when I became 21, at that time, before the age was lowered by Senator Ted Kennedy, I had to wait until I was 21 to register to vote. And all I knew was what I was taught and what I heard in my community. It was a bunch of groupthink. You always vote for the Democrats because the Republicans are racist, the Republicans are for the rich people, et cetera, et cetera. So I followed that for years until I had a problem with my personhood. And I started looking at why did I vote the same way all the time, and that changed my life.
Yes. I think it takes a certain amount of courage to sort of break the mold, or I call it an intellectual closed shop. And it's that way in some communities that are made up of mainly white people, but in the black community, it's a little, especially, I have to say this, even in many of the black churches, many of the black churches they're Bible believing, they'll preach the gospel, they believe in salvation and all of the, the Trinity and all the things that Christians believe, but then they'll support politicians whose views are totally incompatible with Christian doctrine, and who adamantly support abortion, they support the sexual agenda, and it's almost like it's not talked about. It's just we vote this way because that's the way we've always done. And what's very fascinating is that the Republican Party, it was started in 1856, a little bit before that. For the first few generations after that, a black person in Republican politics was synonymous. And I do have to point out that there's a lot of bad Republicans, too. And just being a Republican doesn't mean you're a conservative and a patriot and a godly individual. The party is full of leftists, and they work very closely with the with the Democrats. So, as I'm reading your book, you gave an account of you faced discrimination, you faced racism. So, talk a little bit about that, if you could.
Well, on a very limited scale, when people keep emphasizing discrimination, racism, I think that's over-exaggerated. Yes, I did have an incident with a member of the KKK, but overall, my husband and I, when we were together, back in the early 60s, we purchased a home in Queens Village, Long Island, in an Italian neighborhood. No one burned the cross on our yard or anything.
Uh-huh.
Yes, that happened in the 70s where I went to talk with a man who was a Caucasian, and my brother and I, and he drew a gun on us, and he shot my brother. Then he turned his gun on me and shot me. He said, "I'm going to kill you two black monkeys." Mm-hmm. And that was probably the only time in my life I've ever been called a black monkey. And I was only called a nigger recently by a black woman.
Interesting.
And I lived in the South for 14 years. But I'm an adamant believer about our Second Amendment rights, because if I did not have my gun, even though I was shot, I still managed to get my gun, and I stopped him from shooting my brother. He was aiming at my brother to shoot my brother again, and my brother was already badly wounded. He lost one of his kidneys behind that. And if I wasn't able to hurry up and get my gun from my glove compartment and shoot at the man who was going to shoot my brother again, then my brother probably would have been killed on the spot. So the guy turned back and he shot me again, and then I shot him again, and it was a regular shootout. And then, yes, I was threatened by the KKK. They called me and would tell me that you're going to die tonight. Well, at that time, I was living in Florida, so I could purchase guns, so I had a rifle, I had a .45, et cetera, in my house. I was well armed, and I had clips and everything. So when they would call me and tell me that I was going to die tonight, I said, "Bring it on."
Well, that reminds me of a story, and I shared this with you in a recent conversation.
Yes.
I visited the Motown Museum, which is the location of the original Motown record company in Detroit, and there was a nice young man that was giving a little talk about giving us a tour, and he said that the Motown, they're musicians. He said they were very well liked in the early days before the drugs and other problems, which affect too many musicians. He said they were clean cut, they were wholesome, and they were fine musicians. And he said that they had some gigs in the South, and they would drive down. And that, by the way, when I say the South, that doesn't mean that every single white person is a racist, and that's all they did was shoot at people.
Absolutely not. Right.
Even in for years. But anyway. So he said some Klansmen took shots at the bus. He said, but it wasn't much of a problem. He said, we just shot back, and that was the end of that.
That was the end of that.
And then he mentioned there was a hotel in New Orleans, Louisiana, that they had contracted. And it was an all-white, segregated hotel. And, of course, a lot of these places would hire black musicians. It didn't matter. But the blacks couldn't even stay in some of these hotels. But he said that they broke the contract. Just hey, we just don't want you anymore. We're all white and so forth. Instead of hey hey ho ho angry marches and demonstrations, 3 or 4 years later, maybe it was a little more than they ended up buying the hotel. So in the free market, they bought the hotel.
Yes.
And I look at Jim Crow laws, and you address those in your book. That's really a form of socialism. It was the state or local town ordinances that say you cannot allow certain people to come into your store to contract. Well, I believe in freedom, and you're the same way. I remember Walter Williams, whom I really admire. He was filling in for Rush Limbaugh, whom I don't admire as much. And some fellow, a handicapped fellow, called up and he says, "Well, he was trying to equate being handicapped to being black." Well, that to me is an insult to begin with.
It is an insult.
And, but he said, "How would you think if white people don't want you coming into their restaurant?" He said, "If a white man doesn't want me in his restaurant, I don't want to eat in his restaurant. I don't want to buy his product."
That's right.
So
Absolutely.
that's freedom. And I was reading. You probably read Booker T. Washington's Up From Slavery. His autobiography. Well, one of the things that hit me in that book is that he said that the group of whites that helped him the most wasn't the pious Yankee who was passing judgment on all the evil Southerners, but it was the former slave owners. They donated the most money. They did the most to help. Obviously, they were right there, so they had a vested interest in this. And, the narrative is that every single slave owner, they weren't raping the black slave women, they were whipping the women. And again, that wasn't the case. That did happen to some extent, but
that's right. That's right. But
now,
you know what? But you know what? The whole thing about it is that it was wicked, but God saw everything, and He allowed it to happen for a period of time. But look what good! Look at all the good that came out of that.
You have a chapter. You have a chapter in your book, and I definitely want to talk about that. Thank God for slavery. That is a really difficult. If I said that, I'm going to be hounded out of public life. But you said, I've heard Malcolm. Is it McLittle? Was another. I think that's his name. I haven't heard much about him lately, but he said the same thing. So tell us what what brought you to make a comment like that.
Well, number one, I had an uncle who lived up in the Bronx, Uncle Richie. And when you read the book, you'll see that he escaped from Rikers Island, etc. He saved me. I almost drowned in the Harlem River, Hudson River. And one day I was up at his house, and he was, up in age, and we were just talking. He was talking about his mother, which is my grandmother, and his grandmother, who was my great grandmother. And he said she always had a Bible in her hand, even when she was out there picking peas. And then he just said, "Thank God for slavery." I said, "Uncle Richie, what do you mean by that?" He says, "If it wasn't for slavery, where would we be? What would we be doing?" So I thought about that. I left the house and I thought about that because I'd never heard a black person say that before. And as I grew and as I thought about it, I started realizing what a blessing through all of that horror. What a blessing for me, a black woman, to be born in America. And then the thing about it, if black people say that they love God, how can they keep whining and crying about something that He allowed? How can you love somebody if you keep blaming them for something that was horrific? It was horrible. But there was a plan. The Bible tells us all things work together for good. And slavery worked together for good. We are born in a country where we have freedoms and liberties that I don't believe we have anyplace else. And the proof of the pudding, why are they living in Israel? Why are they going to Paris? On 116th Street in Harlem, a lot of them live there. They've taken over that whole street. And in other places of Harlem, they have left Africa, and they're living here a life that they can't live in Africa. So thank God for slavery.
Well, one of the interesting things is that Haitians are coming into the United States. Now, if the narrative is correct, as the people on the left say, that our country is full of white racists, we've got a dictator in office who is just a horrible racist, and his whole administration is designed to enslave and make life miserable for minorities, for browns, for blacks, and liberal whites, etc. Then why are people coming into this, risking their lives and their children's lives to come to this evil, horrible, racist country? You would think to be under the autocratic thumb of this wicked Donald Trump. You would think that they would start leaving the United States and going to Mexico or going to Canada or going to Germany, where things are so wonderful and lovely. So something's wrong with this narrative here. And in fact, I've been having this running debate, not debate, but the city council here. Boston is typical of most larger left-wing run cities, where they have more interest. They can't pick up my recyclables on time. It sat out here for 4 days, but they can make strong stands against a legal policy that's happening in Texas or on the border states. And so I brought that up. I said, well, wait a minute now. And the same people, it's interesting too on the gun issue. They have these shootings in schools or nightclubs, and they don't blame the individuals. They don't blame the big pharmacy that gives these folks psychotropics that messes up their minds, so they do these outrageous and horrible things. They blame this inanimate object, and they say we need the federal government to have more power to strip these guns away. So you're saying is that you want Donald Trump? You want his administration to come in and take your guns away? Wait a minute now. If Donald Trump is an awful dictator, don't you think you should be armed and to oppose his dictatorship?
That's right. Well, one thing about these liberal policies, they don't make any logical sense. And lying is part of their natural fiber. They're going to lie. They're going to exaggerate. They're going to twist things up. And we have to keep level heads, press forward, try our best to get them out of every elected office. They don't even deserve to be a dog catcher. They would mess that up. Period.
Well, it's interesting. We are a nation of laws. We are a republic. Yes. Basically, where the rights of the minorities are protected by the whim of the majorities. Right. And I mean, when I say minority, I don't necessarily mean blacks or Hispanics, but I mean, anyone who doesn't support the people in power. The president the president's job is to enforce the laws made by, he signs laws or vetoes them, and he's supposed to enforce the law. And even if you don't like the law, and there's some laws that should be changed or repealed. I'm sure there's a lot of laws that should be repealed. But if we're going to have laws, they need to be enforced and obeyed. So we have an immigration law, and he's simply doing what he was elected to do. He said, I'm going to crack down on this. We're not going to have open borders, and we're going to put the interest of the American people first. That rubbed the left the wrong way because they put the interest of American people last.
Yes, they do. They want to build up their voting bloc, and that's why our previous so-called president said America is not defined by borders. How dare him? And I find that to be so insulting. We are not just a vast wasteland. We are a sovereign nation.
That's right. And the other thing, too, is that Obama seemed to be helping he was doing the bidding of the internationalists more than he was helping people. And again, his job isn't, a president's job isn't to create jobs. It's pretty much to make sure that people are left alone so they can create the jobs.
That's right.
And do what's needed. But this immigration policy, it's more harmful to people at the lowest rung of the economic ladder. And we instead, I'm kind of concerned that some of these Republicans who are so wishy-washy, we'll just give in. First off, there was a recent Rasmussen poll, I'm pronouncing it right, only 34% of the Americans buy into this notion that these poor children are being abused by the administration. That most Americans have wised up to it, that they know something's not right. And
the Democrats caused this. The Democrats caused all of this.
That's right. And by the way, as I pointed out earlier, there are Republicans like George W. Bush really wanted open borders.
Yes,
and thankfully, and what's interesting too, people in both parties. Now, I live in Boston. If I looked at the election results for the last presidential election, the population in Boston is about 650,000, between 600 and 650,000. Just a small drop compared to New York City. Of that figure, there were over 220,000 people that voted for Hillary, but 38,000 voted for Donald Trump. And there aren't that many registered Republicans in Boston, so a lot of Democrats voted for Trump. So he must be saying some things that are resonating well with him, with the American people. And I've never seen, I'm 59. I've been sort of following things since 1980 when I first pulled the lever after I got out of the Army. I've never seen so much support for any candidate, for any president, by black people in the black community than Donald Trump. It's really amazing. And a lot of people and again, I've got some issues with Mr. Trump. I think most people who are constitutionalists do. But overall, what I see, I don't dislike a lot of what I see. From the first thing he did as executive order, getting us out of these Trans-Pacific Partnership agreements, that it was setting the tone. He was setting the tone. We're not going to play when Americans come first. And then he opened up he repealed the EPA regulations, unconstitutional, that closed the coal mines in West Virginia. West Virginia was a solid Democrat state, and when Hillary said we're gonna put these people out of business, ha ha ha, I don't think she's getting too many people, Democrats, and I think he win West Virginia by 80%, 80-20. It was
something like that. I know he lost in Virginia because of McCullough.
Yeah, it was amazing. So anyway, now you've been traveling. You travel around the region. You live in New York City. Do you travel around the country or pretty much in the region?
Well, I have had the opportunity to, to go out to Missouri, places like that, and I'm going. Well, and up one or two other places, and a lot of places in New Jersey, down in Egypt, New Jersey, in places you've never even heard of.
I know. Actually, so we have some of our campers and families live in Egypt, New Jersey. So I know.
Really?
Yeah, their last name is Kiernan. In fact, one of the members of the family works for ICE at the Mexican border. So at least he was. I don't know if he's still there. Yeah, and it's sort of interesting. It's interesting too when ICE now they can do their job where they weren't allowed to do their job. It must be so frustrating to take an oath to defend the country, and then you have to look the other way and let all these people in and let them go, what have you. Yeah, it's quite fascinating.
And when they had that case with Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman, I went down to Sanford, Florida, and I was over there by the courthouse, and I interviewed 4 black men. I said, well, what do you think about the case? You know what those men were telling me?
Oh,
you know what they said? I can't get a job and pay my car note because all of these Mexicans are coming here and they have the jobs. I went to another black man. I said, well, what do you think about Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman? Listen, I'm trying to pay my rent, and I can't find a job. Everything that came out of the mouth of those 4 black men involved not being able to get a job, wanting to work, and the jobs were being given to the immigrants that came here, I think illegally, and they would get paying them much less than the American workers. I didn't hear anything about Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman.
Isn't that something? They were more. It's almost. It was a sad incident.
And then we, black people in particular, I'm sorry to cut you off, need to wake up. Because when these entry-level, I think I'm saying that right, jobs are taken by people who have come here illegally, that young mother who says, well, I want to try to work and get out of this project and make a life for my children, that job is gone. Somebody who's done time in prison, who's trying to integrate back into society, he needs that job first before anybody who snuck across our border gets that job. So these people who are putting the immigrants first before they're thinking about American citizens, all of them need to be recalled, retired, and put out of office. And start with Elizabeth Warren.
Well, we hope so. There are a couple of half-decent candidates. You might have met one or two of them at the rally that are going against Elizabeth. And here's a woman that took advantage of all these minority set-aside type programs and claimed that she was of American Indian extraction. Yes. There's a man running against her who's actually from India. He's grew up here, but he came over here as a young boy. He said, he said, I'm a real Indian. It's time for a real Indian instead of a fake Indian.
That's right. You're right about that. She is a real fake, and that's why she won't take DNA.
That's right. That's right. So, in fact, he sent this fellow's name is.
I'm Cherokee and Blackfoot, and you can take my DNA anytime, and I know you'll see it. She's nothing but.
I may have a little. At least I'm Shurtleff's married, because we're an old family from Plymouth, Massachusetts. So we've got a little bit of, all the strains. That I think a few of us married some blacks, and we married Portuguese. And I actually I used to work with he's a distant relative. He's since passed away, but he was very swarthy. And people thought that I was Portuguese because he looked Portuguese. I said, no, neither one of us are Portuguese. I said, well, there's nothing wrong with being Portuguese, but I'm just not Portuguese, So, one of the things that I learned as a young man, I lived during the forced busing era in Boston, where there was a lot of racial turmoil, and it was almost as if the powers that be, the elites, they passed these laws unconstitutional. And they were in the school I went to, the junior high school, was sort of run down. We loved the school, but the building was run down. The books were old. Then all of a sudden we were going to have this forced busing. All of a sudden the repairs are made and the books are new. So it kind of works both ways too sometimes. Yeah. But I saw how I'm of the opinion that all of a sudden we see Klansmen, we see the neo-Nazis, we see the Progressive Labor Party. I'm of the opinion that these folks were working together. They met somewhere and said, "Look, you guys are going to be the white racist. We're going to be the far left." And they and these groups came in and where you had where you had very few racial incidents. We had turmoil. We had curfews. We had people beaten. We had a black man pulled out of his cab and beaten to an inch of his life. Then a white guy is in the black neighborhoods, and he gets beaten and he dies. And you had a white man being stoned to death while he was fishing, and just some ugly things that went on.
Ugly.
And it was and people just got caught up in the emotion. And that's when I never forget, I saw this neo-Nazi hate bus. And all these guys came out, and they're wearing these black Gestapo uniforms or SS uniforms. I was saying, and I'm only 15 or 16. I said, this stuff costs money. Where the heck are they getting the money for these things, And so I think a lot of this is the enemies of America want racial turmoil, and they want a race war. I'm convinced of that. Or else they would be going their utmost to promote all of the negative things about this country.
They are so evil. They are demonically influenced, and they're working the plan of the devil. And that's
that's what does the Bible say?
Huh?
What was it? That there are 5 things the Lord hates, and so many are an abomination: a lying tongue, sowing discord among brothers. If we're fellow Christians, and I learned this because growing up in the forced busing era, I had some racist views, not based on the thought that somehow we're superior, but it was more of survival. But when I became a born-again believer, and I'm going to a church, and this black fellow calls me brother, he's saying that I'm a brother in the Lord. And if I believe in creation, and God doesn't make inferior human beings.
No, he doesn't.
We might make choices. We make bad choices. So if that's the case, then when a Christian calls me a brother in the Lord, it doesn't matter whether he's black, Chinese, Asian, that he's a brother or sister in the Lord. And that's the way we need to look at it. I think it was Pastor Rumbrand who said, when I was being tortured by the communists and they were beating my feet, well, how come my lungs cried out, or because he said the feet are part of the body. So we're all part of the body of Christ, and we have an interest in looking out and protecting each other, helping each other. That's what we'd like to do. In Camp Constitution, we like to have a class about famous patriots, black patriots of the American Revolution. We like to point out that you honor the memory of these brave people who died or wounded or risked their lives. When you stay with you promote freedom and liberty and the values that made this country great. That is how you serve that's the best way to serve the Lord.
Absolutely. When we remember the Judeo-Christian values, then all of this hatred would dissipate. And, people that go to church, I feel so very sorry for them, especially in the black community, because you're not worshiping God in spirit and in truth. If you go into church singing, clapping your hands, and stomping your feet, but then talking about racism, discrimination, and hating white people, and then what would get me is that they want us to hate former slave owners who have long ago met their master.
They're long dead.
It's like we're worshiping them.
Barbara, we have about 30 seconds left. How can people find out about you, get in touch with you, get a copy of your wonderful book?
Well, they can go to any of the outlets, like Barnes & Noble.
Amazon.
Amazon, that's correct. And Escaping the Racism of Low Expectations by Barbara from Harlem. Even if they just type in Barbara from Harlem, the book will come up. And if you go
to YouTube, just put in Barbara from Harlem, and you'll probably have 1,000 videos that pop up, right?
Yes, there are a few of them. Yes.
And I do want to extend an invitation to you and your lovely daughter to come to camp this year, and I'll talk. I'll get a hold of you over that. We'd love to have you for the whole week or a day or two.
Oh, that sounds good. All right. Were you able to use my email? Because the email should be working. Barbara from Harlem.
Yes, I did send it. So, all right. Well, folks, thank you for listening to Camp Constitution Radio with your host, Hal Shurtleff, on WBCQ The Planet. And until next week, may God richly bless you. Good night now.
And may God bless America.